They don't want you to know this. Society deeply fears the lazy, ambitious man. He is the living paradox that challenges the entire system. While the world preaches that success is sweat, haste, and endless productivity, this man proves, without fanfare, that he can achieve more by doing less. Carl Jung would say that this archetype is disturbing because it exposes the hypocrisy of the collective persona. We work to exhaustion not because it's necessary, but because the ego craves validation. And when someone refuses this game, the entire social landscape trembles. The controversy is clear. Does success truly arise from rigid discipline, or is it precisely in the silence of apparent laziness that great ideas mature? Meritocracy, sold as dogma, cannot withstand this question. Because if it's true that selective ambition generates more impact than constant haste, then the entire neoliberal logic collapses. This man is seen as a threat, not because he fails, but because he dares to redefine what it means to win. And herein lies the counterintuitive promise. By understanding the paradox of the lazy ambitious, you can free yourself from the guilt of not fitting into the world's mold. You can transform pauses into power, calm into strategy, and presence into a weapon. Authentic spirituality isn't about rushing to be accepted, but about listening to the self and learning to act in the right time. And when you do, no one else controls your worth. There's a type of person that intrigues everyone. They have grand dreams, bold ideas, and a vivid imagination, but at the same time, they seem lazy, disinterested, even careless about routine. This paradox, unhurried ambition, challenges the traditional mental model that associates success with constant sweat. Carl Jung would help us see this figure differently. Laziness here isn't a lack of will, but an unconscious resistance to the common path the ego insists on following. The persona tries to appear productive, but the soul rejects the mechanical rhythm of society. This contradiction emerges, the desire to achieve much, but the refusal to follow the standard playbook. It's curious to observe how this archetype manifests itself in small, everyday situations. This lazy, ambitious man can spend an entire afternoon lying down, but suddenly in a single hour, he creates something that others would take weeks to develop. He procrastinates, but when he decides to act, he produces with rare intensity. This is disturbing because it breaks the logic of meritocracy. How can someone who appears to do nothing achieve such profound results? Jung would say that this behavior points to an unconventional spirituality. Psychic energy, instead of being drained by the ego's continuous effort, is accumulated in silence until it finds the right moment to manifest. The paradox becomes even more evident when we see that this figure isn't motivated by traditional rewards. Salaries, promotions, social status, none of these seem enough to get him out of bed early every day, but all it takes is an idea that resonates with his self, and he becomes tireless. This selectivity bothers those who believe that discipline is always linear. However, shadow work shows that what we call laziness may be just a symptom of a misalignment between the persona's external desire and the soul's true inner ambition. In practice, many people carry this paradox without even realizing it. Maybe it's you, someone who has tried to fit into the fast-paced world but ended up frustrated, feeling that the effort was enormous and the meaning was small. The lazy, ambitious person isn't incapable, they're selective. They don't waste energy on battles that don't matter to their individuality. Their ego may call them undisciplined, but deep down they're listening to something few have the courage to hear, the inner call for authenticity. And this paradox generates discomfort, not only within him, but also outside. Society, accustomed to measuring value in visible productivity, bristles at this archetype. After all, how can we respect someone who refuses to play the game of overtime, packed schedules, and constant rushing? This man is like a thorn in the side of performance culture. He proves, albeit unintentionally, that it's possible to think big without enslaving yourself to the process. And that, let's face it, is almost provocative. Interestingly, when we analyze historical or cultural figures, we find examples of this profile. Many creative geniuses, such as writers, scientists, and artists, were considered lazy in their daily lives. They slept too much, avoided rigid routines, yet created works that spanned centuries. This isn't about extolling laziness, but about recognizing that psychic energy works in different ways. The unconscious often needs time to mature ideas before bringing them to light. Jung would see this not as a flaw, but as a particular style of individuation. And this is precisely where the next point of discussion arises. If this archetype so defies common logic, what does it teach us about the models that govern society? Could the problem lie in laziness, or in the system itself, which insists on measuring everything by productivity? The lazy, ambitious man is a living mirror that exposes the cracks in the neoliberal model. This system, which extols productivity, competitiveness, and efficiency as supreme values, doesn't know how to deal with someone who breaks this logic. For neoliberalism, an individual's worth is tied to their ability to generate visible numbers. The more you produce, the more you're worth. But Carl Jung reminds us that the psyche isn't guided by external metrics, but by internal archetypes. And this is where conflict arises, when the ego tries to obey the meritocracy playbook, but spirituality demands another path. This meritocracy is conditional because it only recognizes as merit that which fits the standards of continuous effort. An artist who spends weeks doing nothing and suddenly creates a masterpiece is seen as lucky, not as someone who has internally matured their creation. The persona of neoliberal society demands constancy, but forgets that nature operates in cycles, periods of silent germination and moments of creative explosion. The lazy, ambitious man embodies this natural wisdom, but pays the price of being labeled unproductive. It's interesting to note how this economic model even creates a certain kind of psychic guilt. How many times have you felt bad about resting, as if you were betraying an invisible pact? This guilt doesn't come from the soul, but from collective conditioning. The ego has been trained to associate personal value with performance, and any hint of laziness is seen as a moral failing. But shadow work shows us the opposite. Often, rest is exactly what the unconscious needs to reorganize symbols, archetypes, and energies. Idleness can be fertile, as long as it's not a chronic escape. This archetype also challenges meritocracy because it exposes its fragility. After all, not everyone starts from the same starting point. The neoliberal model loves to sell the idea that just try hard and you'll get there, but ignores social, emotional, and even biological conditions. The lazy, ambitious man shows that the game isn't so simple. Effort isn't synonymous with purpose, and meaningless discipline becomes slavery. This is why so many highly productive people live exhausted and unhappy. They achieved external victories, but lost their souls along the way. In practice, society views this profile as a threat because they don't allow themselves to be manipulated so easily. They don't chase status just for the sake of it. They don't buy into the narrative that success is always waking up at 5 in the morning and working 16 hours a day. Their laziness is often an unconscious act of resistance. Of course, there are risks, but there's also power. By refusing to be just another cog, they open space for new ways of experiencing success. Carl Jung would call this an archetypal rupture, the courage to not conform to the collective persona. This debate even touches on spirituality. How many people approach spiritual practices with the same neoliberal logic, transforming meditation into spiritual productivity, yoga into wellness performance? The lazy, ambitious man, by rejecting this rush, points out that true transformation doesn't fit into spreadsheets. It's an inner experience requiring silence, time, and presence. And here, in the clash between ambition and criticism of the system, an inevitable question arises. Is there a difference between ambition that comes from outside, shaped by society, and ambition that is born from within, guided by the soul? Here lies one of the greatest distinctions Carl Jung helps us see, the difference between inner ambition and outer ambition. Outer ambition is that which springs from the ego and persona, the desire to be seen, the pursuit of status, the effort to live up to society's expectations. It feeds on applause and dies when silence arrives. Inner ambition, on the other hand, springs from the self, from deep archetypes that demand expression. It's when someone feels born to create something, not to prove anything. This ambition needs no audience. It is silent, but unshakable. It's easy to see the difference in practice. Outer ambition can make someone work 20 hours a day, but never feel satisfied. It's the executive who achieves positions and still feels empty. Inner ambition, on the other hand, can lead someone to spend weeks in silence, seemingly unproductive. But when it manifests itself, it creates something that changes lives. Think of artists like Van Gogh, who sought expression, not fame, but expression. Or Jung, who broke with Freud not for power, but because his soul could not bear to live a partial truth. This is the clash between the ego's desire and the soul's need. The lazy, ambitious man embodies this conflict intensely. On the outside, he may appear detached, indifferent, even unmotivated. But inside, the psyche is in turmoil, gestating ideas, images, symbols. The ego despairs because it sees no movement, but the unconscious works in silence. This is the kind of ambition that is not measured in hours of work, but in depth of dedication. Spirituality is strengthened precisely when one learns to respect this rhythm, without blaming oneself for not meeting external expectations. A good exercise to distinguish these two ambitions is to ask, if no one could see what I'm doing, would I still do it? If the answer is no, then it's an external ambition dependent on the persona. If the answer is yes, then it's an internal ambition rooted in the self. This simple question can save years of burnout trying to please invisible audiences, and it can redirect energy toward what truly makes sense. In real life, we all carry a bit of both. Outward ambition is necessary to survive in the world. After all, we live in society and need recognition on some level. But when it completely dominates, the soul becomes ill. This is where we see so many cases of burnout. People who have sacrificed their bodies and psyches in the name of an ambition that never fulfilled them. Inner ambition, when cultivated, generates vitality rather than exhaustion. It connects with the natural flow of life, not the ego's timer. This contrast creates a modern dilemma. How to balance these two forces, how to live in a world that demands visible results without betraying one's own essence. Jung would say the answer lies not in choosing sides, but in integration. Using the persona as a tool, but without identifying with it. Listening to the self as a guide, but without ignoring the practical demands of the world. It's a game of subtlety, one that few have the courage to play. And it is precisely at this point of balance that a rare skill emerges, calm and presence. Because when ambition ceases to be compulsion and becomes alignment, haste loses its meaning. And it is in this state that true strength begins to emerge. When the lazy, ambitious person learns to align with their inner ambition, something is born that society rarely understands. The power of calm and presence. Carl Jung said that nothing is more transformative than someone who can remain within themselves, even in the face of chaos. The ego, when trapped by external ambition, rushes from one place to another, trying to prove its worth. The persona smiles, feigning security, but inside lies a hidden desperation. Those who rest in the self don't need this rush. Their energy is silent, yet magnetic. They don't need to shout to be heard because their presence speaks before words. In everyday life, this power is easily recognized. Imagine a room full of anxious people speaking quickly, trying to assert themselves. Suddenly, someone calm enters without needing to justify themselves. A firm look, a slow gesture, and the atmosphere changes. This is no coincidence. It is organized psychic energy. Calmness is a sign that the shadow work has been done. The shadows no longer scream for attention because they have already been recognized. This calm is not laziness, it is strength that cannot be wasted. And that is why it so frightens those who still live in the rush of the ego. This kind of presence also manifests in true leaders. Think of historical figures like Gandhi. He didn't need to raise his voice to mobilize crowds. His calm was his weapon. Or even Jung, who, despite being challenged after distancing himself from Freud, remained firm in his vision, without needing attacks to justify his departure. Spirituality, when real, generates this serenity, the silent conviction of someone who needs no proof, because they are already internally aligned. A simple exercise to cultivate this calm is to practice conscious moments of not doing, not as an escape, but as a practice of presence. Spend 10 minutes simply observing your breath without your cell phone, without distractions, or take a walk without music, just feeling your steps. These small practices teach the ego to quiet down and allow the unconscious to reorganize energies. Over time, the person realizes that they don't need to rush for everything to happen. Often, it's precisely when they stop that the best ideas emerge. This power of calm is also strategic. While others exhaust themselves reacting to every stimulus, those who know how to wait observe the movement of the world. They see patterns, perceive symbols, and read archetypes that go unnoticed by those in a hurry. It's like a chess player who takes his time moving the pieces, knowing that patience opens gaps that haste never sees. This is the difference between acting in the heat of the ego and acting in the clarity of the self. Ultimately, calm is revolutionary because it breaks with the modern myth that only those who run the fastest win. Calm reveals that winning is, above all, resisting collective haste. It means remaining whole when everyone is fragmented. It means having presence when everyone is scattered. This does not mean inaction, but conscious action, free from despair. Calm is the territory where true ambition is strengthened. And this is where another challenge arises. How can someone like this, who seems to move at their own pace, deal with social and emotional pressures? What happens when calmness and selective energy collide with a world that demands haste and results? The lazy, ambitious man, by choosing to live at this selective pace, pays a high price. Society constantly pressures him, trying to fit him into the mold of uninterrupted productivity. The ego of those around him can't stand the idea of someone who doesn't bend to the same rhythm, and the collective persona reacts with labels: lazy, irresponsible, dreamy. Jung would say, this is projection. People see in him what they themselves repress, the secret desire to stop, breathe, and not live in a rush. But by carrying this archetype, he becomes a target not only of external judgment, but also of internal conflicts. Emotionally, the challenge is even more complex. This type of person may feel guilty for not meeting expectations, or even ashamed for not fitting into social norms. They often oscillate between moments of intense confidence and phases of paralyzing self-criticism. This back and forth is a sign that shadow work needs to be deepened. The ego, pressured by the collective persona, tries to convince them they're wrong. But in reality, conflict isn't a sign of failure. It's proof that individuation is underway. The soul doesn't accept being reduced to external metrics, but it also suffers from being misunderstood. In practice, social challenges arise in small, everyday situations. A boss might interpret your calmness as a lack of commitment. A romantic partner might see your pickiness as disinterest. Friends might be bothered by your refusal to follow the same routine of parties, appointments, or productivity. This clash creates isolation. But there's a lesson here. When someone learns to embrace who they truly are, even in the face of criticism, they find a strength that goes beyond approval. This is the strength of identity, built not against others, but for themselves. However, it's not worth romanticizing. This profile does face the risk of self-deception. Sometimes selective laziness can mask real avoidance, sabotage, or fear of exposure. Therefore, spirituality here requires internal discipline. It's necessary to distinguish when the body and soul are asking for a break, and when it's just the ego masking insecurity. Carl Jung said that the shadow is cunning. It can turn even rest into an excuse. This is why consciousness must always be vigilant. Another emotional challenge is dealing with loneliness. This type of person, because they don't follow the collective archetypes of success, can feel out of place, as if there's no place for them in the world. But it's precisely in this solitude that the deepest connection with the self can be born. Great creators throughout history have experienced this isolation, which, although painful, opened doors to transformative insights. Solitude, when it's not an escape, can be a womb of rebirth. This profile also faces the constant temptation of comparison. In a world where everyone flaunts their achievements on social media, the lazy, ambitious person may look the other way and feel behind. But here's the paradox. Often, while others accumulate superficial results, they are developing something that, when it emerges, will have a real impact. The key is not to be dragged along by the pace of others, but to trust your own timing. And it is at this point that the inevitable question arises: how, then, can we resist these pressures without losing ourselves? What internal strategy can allow us not only to survive, but to remain on this path without giving up our very essence? For the lazy, ambitious man to survive and remain true to his own rhythm, he needs to develop an internal strategy that goes beyond willpower. Carl Jung would say that this strategy arises from contact with the unconscious and the courage to face one's own archetypes. The ego alone cannot sustain this battle because it will always be pressured by the collective persona to yield. This is why shadow work is essential, recognizing the shadow of self-sabotage, empty procrastination, and internalized guilt. Only then can he separate fertile rest from unconscious escape. In practice, this strategy begins with self-awareness rituals. Writing daily about one's emotions, for example, helps differentiate between actual laziness and a necessary break. Meditation, even just 5 minutes a day, creates space between stimulus and response, strengthening calm. Even short readings can be anchors. Works like Jung's Memories, Dreams, Reflections, or Domenico De Masi's Creative Leisure remind us that there is intelligence in rest. Spirituality here isn't theoretical, it's applied discipline to maintain balance. Another pillar of this strategy is cultivating clarity of purpose. Without knowing exactly what they're looking for, this profile risks scattering their energy. Therefore, it's crucial to have goals aligned with the self, not just the ego. A good practice is to ask yourself weekly, is what I'm doing bringing me closer or further away from the life I want to live? This simple question can prevent months of detours into meaningless tasks. By answering honestly, the lazy, ambitious person channels their selective energy toward what truly matters. Resistance also requires building a fortress of internal and external boundaries. This means learning to say no without guilt, establishing quiet times and avoiding energy-draining environments. It's like creating a sacred space within one's own routine where calm is non-negotiable. This boundary isn't isolation, but protection. After all, those who expose themselves too much to the noise of the world lose the ability to listen to their unconscious. It's in silence that the ideas that give meaning to their ambition emerge. Staying on this path also depends on recognizing allies. You don't have to walk alone. Finding people who understand this logic, who also value calm and authenticity, strengthens the journey. This can happen in spirituality study groups, in creativity circles, or even in online communities that reject rushing as a way of life. Being around those who understand helps sustain choices that, for many, seem insane. But perhaps the most important element of the strategy is radical patience. This profile needs to learn that its fruits don't appear in the market's time, but in the soul's time. And this is a constant test. Society demands haste. The unconscious demands maturation. Here, only patience guarantees endurance. Like a tree that takes years to blossom, but when it does, it transforms the entire environment. And when this man manages to sustain his strategy without getting lost in the external noise, something extraordinary happens. He begins to redefine his own personal myth. He stops being seen as simply lazy and starts to be recognized as someone who redefines what it means to be successful in the modern world. When the lazy, ambitious man sustains his internal strategy and resists external pressures, he enters a rare territory, the transformation of the personal myth. Carl Jung argued that we all live guided by internal narratives, often inherited from culture or family. The ego, in its eagerness for acceptance, dresses up these stories as if they were unique. The persona, then, acts as guardian of this script, playing the role expected by society. But there comes a time when this old story no longer fits, and then the individual is called upon to rewrite their myth. This particular archetype breaks one of the greatest modern myths, that success is merely accumulating visible achievements, being tirelessly productive, and measuring life in numbers. By refusing to follow this logic, it inaugurates another vision. Success is being aligned with the self, living in the rhythm of the soul, transforming pause into power and calm into clarity. Spirituality here is not an escape, but a redefinition of parameters. Shadow work ensures this is not self-deception. It's not about exalting laziness, but about understanding that purposeless productivity is merely a disguise for emptiness. In practice, this redefinition of success can be seen in very concrete choices. It's the professional who trades a prestigious position for a job that gives them time to create. It's the artist who turns down million-dollar contracts because they don't want to lose their authenticity. It's the person who decides to work 4 days a week to have more time for silence and study. These movements, although seen as strange, are signs of individuation. The collective myth loses strength and the personal myth comes to life. This transformation isn't just individual, it has a social impact. When someone dares to live this way, they show others that there is an alternative to the current model. This is disturbing, of course, because it exposes how many sacrifice themselves for a success that doesn't fulfill them. But it also inspires because it opens the way to new ways of life. As Jung would say, the personal myth, when lived authentically, has the power to influence the collective unconscious. The lazy, ambitious man, when he embraces this new myth, ceases to be an enigma and becomes a sign of the times. He shows that it is possible to be ambitious without being a slave, that it is possible to want a lot without chasing everything. His apparent laziness reveals itself as selective wisdom, and his calmness as a weapon against the destructive haste of the modern world. He redefines success not as a race, but as a conscious journey. This redefinition also changes the relationship with one's own shadow. What was once seen as weakness, slowness, pause, lack of haste, becomes part of strength. The ego, which was once ashamed, learns to honor these qualities. The persona, which previously struggled to fit in, now becomes an authentic expression of a new way of living. This is the ultimate alchemy, transforming flaw into a mark, criticism into identity, paradox into strength. And ultimately, redefining success opens the door to a kind of freedom few know, the freedom to not be defined by the gaze of others. This is true victory, because deep down, what society fears isn't this man's laziness, but the fact that he no longer needs their approval. So tell me, how long will you measure yourself by society's clock? How long will you feel guilty for not living up to the myth of infinite productivity? Carl Jung showed us that the real danger isn't laziness, but disconnection from the self. The lazy, ambitious man isn't weak. He's the mirror that reveals the farce of a world obsessed with rushing aimlessly. And the question remains, will you remain on the stage of the collective persona? Or will you allow yourself to write your own myth? Perhaps it's time to transform this laziness into a strategy, to realize that idleness can be fertile, that silence can be creative, that calm can be more revolutionary than haste. The shadow work begins here, recognizing the discomfort of not fitting in and using it as fuel to redefine what success means. Not a success sold in advertising, but one that springs from within, aligned with the self, sustained by dignity and purpose. Now it's up to you. Where has your ambition been hijacked by ego and society? In what areas are you rushing aimlessly just to prove something that doesn't even make sense? And most importantly, what would happen if you had the courage to stop, breathe, and listen to the voice that comes from within? Perhaps that's where your true power lies. If this video touched a chord within you, write in the comments which part of your life calls for a new definition of success. I want to know where you feel the need to say enough, to haste and make room for calm. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, each reflection is an invitation to break myths, challenge archetypes, and get closer to your true individuation.